Tori, you created this album after you made a decision that if you didn't completely love the process of creating music, you'd walk away from it. Now, what brought you to that point?
It was a lot of different things. I was on the road in Adelaide during COVID, and we pretty much had to get from Adelaide to the Sunshine. I had to get from Adelaide to the Sunshine Coast within that 24-hour period of border closures. Mm-hmm. So we raced. At the time as well, I was breaking up with my boyfriend at the time, right on that trip. So it was a lot going on at once. So that kind of was the beginning of what felt like a breakdown of a lot of things for me. I toured with my ex. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of tours together in the caravan. And then I was in the middle of releasing my second record at the time. It felt very fatiguing trying to release a record during COVID. Mm-hmm. And then COVID obviously happened, and everyone's scrambling, doing all the social media stuff. And, you know, a lot of it wasn't sitting well with me as well. And it was very fatiguing, getting up every day, not sure what to do, trying to scramble to fill in the void of what the music industry looked like at the time. Got to the point where I was just like, what am I offering this anymore? Mm-hmm. Like, what is this anymore if we're not doing creativity the way that I thought it was? Right. Then what is it? And so I had to, once the second record was out, I really started to take steps back. I was a lot quieter online. Mm-hmm. And I was afforded the opportunity to go and do a renovation of a tree house up in the Sunshine Coast, hinterland, and I put all my energy into that for quite some time, and it was the best experience. And that's when I started to learn that artists need to experience things in order to be able to create them. Right. So for me, that renovation and being in nature again and living such a grounded life, mm-hmm. I was like able to rebuild. So through a lot of the breakdown and then understanding what creativity was again, mm-hmm. doing a lot of things from a more childlike curiosity rather than I need to do this to get this result, mm-hmm. helped me to understand what it was to show up. So I really gave myself the option to not do it, mm-hmm. and that gave me the freedom to be able to choose to do it.
Had you felt to that point that you did exist in a form of creative flow, that for you had 2 albums out, you've been touring, no doubt you've been writing songs for quite a while, performing, singing. So did it feel as though there was just this sort of rhythm or flow to your creativity that made sense, and then the pandemic disrupted that so much that you actually felt in your body there was some kind of blockage almost?
I was definitely doing it in a different way. I was writing, I was doing... I was in a form of creative flow for sure, but it wasn't aligned with the reason I started. Right. So I became a little more plugged into the machine of mm-hmm. what music should be rather than why I started doing it in the first place. So I was listening to a lot of different opinions that weren't really conducive to the way that I wanted to create. Mm-hmm. Not for any other reason than it's hard when I was young, early 20s at the time of creating my second record, so I was a little more impressionable and was listening to a lot of different opinions mm-hmm. around an industry that's ever-changing. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different ways to be creative. So when you're trying to be successful in a zone where there is a formula that they think you can get from A to B mm-hmm. in doing that, but it's not, there's a grind there as a creative person, it's easy to jump on that bandwagon mm-hmm. And try to produce what you think you need to be producing. Yeah. So I can easily do that. I just realized that I wasn't really enjoying myself in that zone. Mm-hmm. I was doing it because I felt like it's what I had to do mm-hmm. rather than from the real raw part of just, well, let's just see what happens and then release it and see if people resonate with it as well, which I think in turn, as artists, I resonate personally with people who have that mindset rather than let's utilize this formula and create this kind of song and then, that should get the charts and all that kind of thing, which there's a place for that 100%. I just never envisioned myself in that place.
Yeah. You mentioned the reason why you started making music, and I would imagine for you that there were possibly other avenues of creative expression, because you struck me as someone who does have or would have modes of creative expression available to you. Why is music the right mode for you?
I think the songwriting. I think the writing aspect. I've always considered myself a songwriter first. I feel like I can tap into something that I don't quite understand when I'm writing. I started singing and using my voice, and I started getting lessons quite early on. And the few of the teachers that I had one teacher say that my voice was a bit weird. This was early on, and I was 12, and my voice was kind of a strange in the. Well, I think they were in musical theatre. It was a woman through the school or something like that, my high school. And she was a musical theatre teacher, so my strange voice wasn't quite fitting with what she thought. So she was trying to teach me how to sing in musical theatre.
Right.
And I couldn't understand why I couldn't get it, but it was my tone. It's just I have a different tone to that classic sound. So I'd already had this impression that I had a strange voice. I was like, okay, well, I like singing. I like what that feels like to express in that way. So when I did find a singing teacher that was teaching me Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana songs, who was also musical theatre too, ironically, but he could understand there was a different way to do it. So that was really fun, and that kind of helped me figure out how voice can express and how you can express through your voice. Pair that with later down the track, the songwriting, that's kind of my thing. That's where the expression is. The guitar, the performing, the rest of it, that all definitely comes later.
I mean, being told you have a strange voice is, I think, a tricky thing for a young person to hear. So at that age, did you consider trying to fit yourself into a different mould? Because I'm just thinking, later on, once you're in the music industry, that would become a thing of trying to fit into a particular mould. Or did you actually hold your nerve with what you knew was your authentic voice?
When I was younger, I was definitely a lot more like, well, I just sound like this. Like I was a bit more able to just go, well, I don't understand what you're talking about, so that's what it is. So I think earlier I stood my ground a lot more easily because I was already in my rebellious phase anyway, so it was kind of a lot easier for me to do that. It definitely impacted me though, because when I did music in school and if I was in music class, I wasn't exactly an academic, so I didn't put much effort into anything, including music, because I thought, oh, well, I don't fit there. So that kind of mindset around it, rather than going, well, I have something else to bring, which later on I understood. It was more, well, that's their kind of music. I don't belong in that area. Right. Yeah.
Once you started songwriting, I'm interested in whether you actually felt this strange voice gave you permission to write songs in a way that perhaps you hadn't heard other artists around your age or other artists you admired writing.
Definitely, because I was doing something a little bit different. When I started writing songs, I'd just left high school and I dropped out earlier, and I was listening to a lot of country music. And country music was definitely not cool when I was listening to it as a teenager. It's very dorky, and I felt very like it was mine almost, and I was able to express in a way that none of my friendship group would understand, and it kind of took me down this real self-discovery journey, because it did feel like it was something that was for me, that no one understood, and I could just explore it. And in turn being able to create and express in a different way, that was a fun little like adventure for myself.
Right. So the way you write lyrics, there's so much beautiful detail in them, and they have stories. So there's definitely this sense of you building a world and a story and taking the listener through them. Are there other influences on your songwriting, like books, for example, particular authors who may have influenced you over the years, or is it just that you surround yourself with all sorts of storytelling and that feeds into your songwriting?
I definitely think that I'm very inclined to learn about people,
right?
Stories. I love listening to people's perspectives. I love all perspectives. I really love learning. Even if I disagree with it, I find it very interesting to understand people in that way, and where they're coming from with their perspectives. So I love that. And I also do read a lot of books, whether it's fiction and non-fiction. I've always been a pretty avid reader, and I think that's actually helped me subconsciously to be able to create stories and worlds is through reading. That's the biggest thing. I've mentored a few younger artists, and I tell them to read. That's my instruction. I'm like, go read lots of books, because you'll be able to expand your vocabulary, but also understand other people's ways of telling stories.
I think it's quite out of fashion now to find other people's opinions interesting when you don't agree with them. We live in an age where it's basically, if you don't agree with me, that I don't want to know you as a person. In fact, I don't think you're a valid person.
Yeah, it is pretty much the way it is, isn't it? But I think it's irresponsible to close yourself off to other people. I think if your perspective is at the center of love, you need to be able to lovingly accept other people, even if you disagree with them.
And I imagine this comes from a place of curiosity as well. Like, that's a fundamental motivation for you. And as a musician, probably also leads you to be curious about other genres of music and to listen to different things. And so we've seen you go from a country album first, rock album, now back to country. But I would think there are other things you're listening to which feed into your understanding of who you are as a musical artist.
For sure. I mean, I listen to Enya a lot. Right. Love Enya. On the way down here, we were listening to like a Celtic playlist. I just love all different music. And I think as an artist as well, if you're a musician, expanding your genre is going to help you create your own place in the musical landscape. There's so much to take from different genres, and applying it to your craft can be really beneficial, even if it doesn't feel quite right. When I wrote Prolepsis, the rock record, it was from the perspective of I want to play this live in pubs.
Right.
So I was listening to a lot of music that, the Divinals and just a lot of the 90s grunge scene, because that's the energy I wanted to be able to bring to a live show, because we were singing and performing in a lot of pubs. So that was my project for that time period. I believe expanding your genre and taking bits and pieces and learning from other genres can be so beneficial to any creative.
And so you said that was your project, to play it live in pubs, but of course it coincided with the pandemic when pubs were not available for you to play in. So I think it's really understandable that you arrived at this energetic place where there was essentially one level of something going on and then another that was completely stopped.
Yes.
So to bring us back to All We Have Is Who We Are, which is your latest album, and having made the decision to proceed with music, in your body, did that feel freeing, that you'd actually unlocked something that could then be set free? For sure. And, it probably was a massive part of, this is how I thought it was going to go, and it didn't go that way, wanting to play in pubs and perform the songs. Coming to this record, stripping it right back to the way that I find it very easy to write these songs, the ones that I've written on this record. I found it quite, not difficult, but it was definitely a test of my ability to
structure and create songs for Prolepsis.
Mm-hmm.
So to come back to this style of writing that comes extremely naturally to me was like okay, I sit really easily here. This kind of flows creatively in this area.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was just I've called it a breath of fresh air, and it really was.
Right.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of power in surrendering, I think, and it's partly about surrendering control, but there's also this aspect of surrendering to something greater than yourself, whatever you want to call it. And so I'm wondering if you felt that as a surrendering of power and control, almost, whether it was something greater or not. And I also note that you have a song on the album called Not in Control.
Yes. And, you know, in our last chat that we had, I said that I'm quite a controlling person.
Yeah.
And
Gemini
through and through. I do love to micromanage my own life, and creativity has fallen into that category quite a bit. The creative process, not necessarily, it's probably the one area of my life that I don't try to micromanage. I am in the process, particularly in the last year, of unlearning how to just relax and actually hand myself over to something greater than myself in all aspects of life, not just the creativity part of it. When I am writing, I do believe that there is something else in the room. It's not just me. I'm able to tap into that greater energy and bring it into reality. And I think that's, my dad used to always say to me, especially around when I was writing my EP, he'd go, where does that come from? And he's like, puzzled, because I've just created this song, and, you know, my parents aren't exactly musicians. So he was always like, how did you write that? Like, did you really write this song? And I couldn't understand it. I'd be like, I don't know. Just very like, I don't know, I just did it. So I've come to understand over the last 10 years of doing it that it is something greater than me. And I have that connection to be able to tap into it. Having that has made me aware that there is something greater, and bringing that into the other aspects of life can actually make your life a lot easier, rather than trying to push and pull and force things into place.
I think it can be hard to maintain that open connection, though, because when it comes to you instinctually, as you said it did, you can think, oh, well, this is great. And then the self-consciousness begins, and that self-consciousness is introduced by other people, not necessarily your father saying, did you really write that? But we can hear and see a lot of other artists and people creating things talking about maybe the drudgery of creation and how many hours they're working at it, and it's really hard to get this song out or whatever. So you can start to mistrust your connection to source, if we want to call it something like that. So I do think it requires a lot of courage almost to claim that and say, well, actually, this is what I have. And also rededicating yourself to it at times when it may feel like, not that you don't deserve it maybe, but just that it's not real.
It's funny because I've read a lot of self-help books, a lot of spiritual books, a lot about how you can attract experiences to you rather than trying to force them. Even, you know, when you kind of look in the areas of like money mindset and things like that, it's so funny because when I hear people talking about creativity, like they're slogging at it, I think, well, that sounds bloody awful. Why would you put your energy into that? That sounds terrible. You don't have to do that. And then here I am in other areas of life, just like forcing it subconsciously, not even trying to, or not even being aware of what I'm doing. And I think, well, that's obviously what people who think they have to force creativity are doing. Because you don't have to do it that way. There is another option, and it's so hard once you're in that mindset to get out of it. But it does exist. And when I hear people saying that they've spent hours on a song, or, oh, do you like this word? Should I change it? I'm like, oh, that sounds exhausting.
And not at all fun.
No, I wouldn't do it that way. I just would stop.
But I do also think when it's something that flows, there can be perhaps jealousy, envy from people for whom it's not flowing, which can put impediments in your path, and they may not realise that actually to maintain that sense of flow, you actually have to keep removing those impediments. It's ongoing work. It's not as if you just get up in the morning and think, well, this is amazing, this is flowing through me and everything's wonderful. It's a constant practice of dedicating yourself to keeping the channel open.
Yeah, and over the years I've understood that there is so many things in our society today that block the ability to do it.
Yeah.
And I've been able to expand the periods of time where I do feel like I'm creatively in flow, and being able to tap into it a bit more easily. Whereas I think in the earlier phases of writing, I would kind of fluke moments.
Right.
I would be able to go, okay, well, I'd quickly do that, and I'd fluke them. It's been a growing practice of disconnecting, and I think I appreciate social media for what it is and what it can do, and I enjoy consuming aspects of it. However, I do think that if you're living your life through a screen, you're not going to be able to tap into that, because that's going to block you off completely. Similarly with alcohol, if you're drinking all the time, you're not going to have that experience because you're ignoring it. Your brain is quite literally closing it off from the experience, similar to your phone. So by getting rid of certain things, it frees you and unblocks you in ways that you can tap into it. But the biggest thing is just being bored. Allow yourself to be bored and not be thinking of a million things at once. That's where you're probably going to find the best things happen.
Yes, let the field lie fallow, as I sometimes like to say.
Yes, I love that. Yes, yes.
Because things will grow there, but it is really the curse of our social media society, I guess, that boredom is not allowed. People are standing at traffic lights waiting to cross, and the phone's out.
Yeah, I even try, like, if I'm waiting for an appointment, to just sit there.
Freaks people out, though.
It does.
Yeah.
People look at you like, oh, is she right?
Because I do the same thing. I was at the dentist and just sat there.
Just sit there without.
But you can see people walking thinking, what's going on?
Yeah, she's like from a Amish community or something.
But we were talking about earlier, you mentioned going back to the Sunshine Coast to renovate this place and feeling grounded, and you live on the land now. And in terms of your creative flow, I'm wondering about the bodily feeling of it and instinctual feelings in terms of your creativity when you're songwriting, also when you're singing and recording, and whether that's something that went away for a time and whether you actually had to almost train yourself to reconnect with how things felt in your body.
Even recently, I had to retrain myself again. Yeah. I think we can be very influenced by, even if something slightly goes off axis or something in your life kind of shifts. Last year, all at once, so much happened at a time. That set me off. I was not able to be creative. I was just on autopilot trying to get through the days. It took me about 6 months to be able to even be open to trying to fix it again. So I think when people are in that point of their life or in a phase of their life where they're in a negative place and they can't shift it, it's very difficult to tell them to get out of it, pull yourself out. It's so hard once you're in it deep. And I think time and just continuously showing up for practices like I was journaling a lot. I was just I was running a lot.
Right.
I started running again, and that was a moving meditation for me, because I would just put on music and just move the energy through my body. That was super helpful. But creating a plan for yourself where you're connecting with your body, with your mind, with spirit, and being able to, even if it feels like it's hard at that time, doing the practices will slowly but surely get you to the other side where you're able to connect again understand it for what it is and see the bigger picture again, rather than that really narrow, energetic thing that you're experiencing. So practices for sure.
And are you also somewhat kind with yourself when you find yourself in those moments of life when there's a lot going on and, for lack of a better term, the energy is stopped or blocked by external forces? Do you just say to yourself, it's okay, I will get back there, I know the practices to do it? Or is there still a little bit of a voice that says, you should know how to get out of this, you should be doing something else?
Yeah, there was in this particular situation. There have been periods before where they've been much shorter, and I've been able to just kind of switch out. For this one, I was really knocked back. So it was me going, why can't you just get back to where you were?
Right.
And just like fighting that. Again, the minute I was like, well, just let it ride.
Okay.
Ride it out, just feel the feelings. And that was a big thing as well. Stop trying to control your emotions, just feel them and just experience them. The minute you do that and you actually allow your emotions to come through, there's another side. You're able to go, okay, I felt it now, I can actually leave it there and take a step forward.
And you mentioned running, and I do think moving the body is critically important to creative practice, because it's partly about the energetic return. So if you're expending it, it will come back to you. But I don't actually hear it talked about much in those terms. And it's a fairly simple exchange. If you expend, you return.
Yeah, absolutely. I think movement is a creative practice, and making your vessel available to new energy. And I think if, like, being stuck in that negative energy that I was, there was nowhere for anything good to come in unless I was moving it. The same as far as feeling your emotions. If you're not feeling them and you're trying to just, control everything and not allow it to come through, whether it's cry, scream, whatever, it's going to be stuck and you're not going to be able to let anything new in. So releasing it gives you that opportunity to bring something more positive in, through whatever the case might be, meditation or running or,
I'm also very fond of saying that humans need to whack things, whether it's a punching bag or a tennis ball or something like that. It's that just externalizing something seems to be quite beneficial, and I think beneficial for creativity as well.
Therapeutic for sure.
Yeah.
I've been like tossing up doing some form of martial arts actually, because I hear that it's interesting actually. Do you know Maynard James Keenan? He's Tool lead singer. He does jiu-jitsu, and he finds that a creative practice, and I find that fascinating. He ties it in quite closely together. So I was like, maybe I should give jiu-jitsu a go.
Or just whacking out the externalizing of the energy. So it's again, as you said, you got to let it go for it to allow good things to come in, and I think that's a big part of it.
For sure.
In terms of feeling grounded, literally earthed, living on the land, I do think it's something we can hear in your voice on the album. There's this resonance that comes from Muladhara Chakra, for lack of a better term, and that's the lineage I'm in, that really sort of ripples throughout the rest of your vocals and throughout the music that's on the album. And I'm wondering, when you went in to record, whether you were conscious of that, or that's just the wellspring you come from now.
It was very natural, and having written those songs in the treehouse that I was, living in at the time, being very connected to the earth, I think it definitely came through quite naturally. Because it is, when you hear people's voices, it's this vibration, and sometimes you don't know where it's come from. When you hear people's voices that are kind of outlandish, it's like, well, wow, where did that come from? I think it is tapping into something as well. So to hear the earthiness and the grounded aspect of the album vocally, like, I think you have to be on a particular wavelength even maybe to tap into the hearing it. So I appreciate it.
Well, I kind of felt it as well, if that makes sense. It was literally this lower chakra resonance. I was like, oh, yeah, there's something in Tori's voice that I could almost hear it ascending.
Wow.
Through each song. It was actually in each song. So
thank you.
Yep, no, I only say it if I hear it. So the album is called All We Have Is Who We Are. And of course, the question of who we are is a life's work. And I would imagine for you that being an artist is intrinsically bound up with finding out who you are. But at the point at which you were making that decision about whether to go on or not, did it feel like you might not know who you were ever going to be if you did not take that path of creating art? Was there, were there doubts about who you were and what was going to happen?
Definitely a bit of an identity situation there. I don't think I could ever not be creative in some capacity. I live quite a creative life no matter what I'm doing. Even at my day job, everything I do, I see it as a creative endeavor, even though it's a lot of administration or whatever the case might be. I try to put a creative lens on it. So there is no way I could ever live life not as a creative. I believe that as an artist, if you're someone who creates art, creates something from nothing, you are an artist. Doesn't matter if you put it out in the world, doesn't matter if you monetize it, you're just an artist and you're a creative person and you show up to life with a creative lens. So I do believe at my core, I'm an artist. Wasn't too sure if music was going to be that endeavor, but I did know that no matter what I do, it's creative.
Yeah. Now, the song Alchemist, I think, is sort of like in the canon for you, in that it's not necessarily an autobiography, but I think there's a lot of your story at the moment that's bound up in that song. And there's a line in that that says, choosing the light instead of just to simply exist. And we've talked about being on a creative path and opening yourself up to that, but choosing the light is something else again. And I do think that is the harder path, because you have to regularly commit to it and remind yourself to commit to it and get those impediments out of the way. So at what point in your life really did you realize that was the choice?
I think sometimes you hit such a deep rock bottom where it's so miserable, you kind of think there has to be something better than this. Yeah. And it is. It's a hard path to want to be happier and a happy person when the world will tell you that it's not a happy place to be. And, you know, I think I was very, especially during COVID, I was so caught up in trying to be everything at once. And I wanted to help people. And I was like, I'm going to change the world, you know, and you want to be part of that. But under this lens of quite a dark way to do it, or a heavy way to trudge through with it, I had to really get out of that mindset. You can, like they say, you have to put your own life vest on first. So if you're not doing well and you're trying to fix everything, it's going to be a pretty hard slog. So when I realized that I wasn't great and I needed to actually change the way I saw things in order to be able to pass on a message of hope, I used to get I used to hear the word light worker and cringe. It would make me go, okay, okay, fairy. But I kind of understand it a lot differently now. I understand a lot of parts of spirituality a lot differently now from just releasing what society has taught us about every aspect of whether it's religion or spirituality. But with, the light worker part, that's why I decided to use that, choosing the light. It was almost a lesson for me to remind myself that you're allowed to be happy and help people at the same time. Right. You don't have to suffer in order to do that. Yeah. Similarly with creating art, there's like this part of the artist's journey where people believe that the artist needs to be miserable in order to create anything worth putting out there, which I think is the total opposite. I've created this record and I've never been happier, whereas that, might not fit the mold of what the true artist, the suffering artist looks like. And being able to kind of combat that for myself, it's like, okay, cool. I'm allowed to be happy and an artist. I'm allowed to be happy and help people in the way that I see that I can help people as well. So I don't remember what your question was. Kind of went
it's just about choosing light, and you have beautifully answered it.
Okay,
but
cool.
what you were saying about the idea of the true artist or the tortured artist it has no doubt been incredibly damaging for a lot of people over the years as they attempted to live up to it and maybe fought their own inclinations to be content with various things. And also such a weird construction when you think about where the energy to create art would come from, because that's a vortex of dark matter essentially drawing someone down if you're going to be miserable and try to create art from that. And then you can necessarily really only go one step forward and maybe 3 steps back each time. So it would become harder and harder to create art out of it, and that would set up a fairly damaging loop.
Yes. And it's miserable.
Yeah.
It's a miserable way to live. You know, I've definitely lived in that for a period of time where I thought, well, I have to be really, like, I have to draw on my, the darker parts of my mind and able to be able to create anything worth writing about. And when you're fixating on whether it's my anxious tendencies or maybe depression that's come up from time to time and fixating on that, where your energy goes, it grows. So I was focusing on things that were dark so much that I was just making it worse and really making that my identity. And like you said, there's only so many things that you can create from that. It will block you when you get to a certain point, and you can see that through history.
Yeah. And also love what you said about how you can be happy and help other people at the same time, because I think little girls, young women conditioned to be not selfish. That's a cardinal sin, that you would ever be selfish. And so to retrain yourself to come to that point and realize that it's okay is quite extraordinary, actually, because it takes a lot of deprogramming. Lots.
And I don't even think I'm out of it yet. I think it's a constant battle in your brain to deprogram yourself from that selflessness. I'm a selfless woman and I do all the things, and just treating yourself with the same respect that you're treating others. It's the first step to being able to do it well.
And also it's the converse of the dark matter creative process, in that if you're looking after yourself, if you're happy, there's so much more energy you're generating in order to give it to others.
And I think it works a lot better if you're coming from a place of good and love and joyful energy. You're going to achieve much more, but you're going to be able to do it from a healthier perspective. And they're going to receive it in a different way.
Yeah. And a place that you can regenerate from. So when you are expending it, it's this energetic return rather than you running yourself down.
For sure.
When you mention anxiety, I do think that's interesting in relation to creativity as well, because I'm not that sure it's negative. I think a negative label's been attached to it for good reason, because for some people it's quite crippling. But it suggests to me it's actually about that momentum of wanting to move forward, and it can feel like anxiety in the body, but I wonder whether it's actually something else, whether it's just sort of like the tap on the inside of the skull of, you need to do something, you need to move, there's something that needs to get out.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it, and I think a lot of artists experience it, and I think it has a 2-prong situation for artists as well. Sometimes there is stuff to move, other times it can go in the other direction where it can cripple you. It's a matter of having the tools as well to be able to understand it for what it is, and knowing how to get and navigate out of it. Like I said, the last time I was there in a heavy way, it took me a long time to get out of it. Whereas day to day, it's a little bit easier. You can kind of go, okay, well, that's where's that coming from? What's that feeling? And like I said, feeling that emotion and being okay with it being there. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, you're not going to take the day. You're just going to be there, and we're going to just ride this wave together and move through it like that. And I think having tools to navigate anxiety, I don't know anyone who doesn't experience it.
Me neither.
I think we live in a world that is built to make us anxious. So being able to navigate day to day without being controlled by it, I think everyone needs those tools. And understanding that it's not always to your detriment. You can use it for a good cause if you can get to that place with it too.
Yeah. Not unlike having nerves before a performance. I always say the nerves tell you that you care about what's about to happen. If you didn't feel them, you'd be a bit blasé.
Yeah.
And so it's that, seeing it, I guess, as a positive energy and momentum rather than something that's going to drain you.
Yeah, definitely. And I still get pretty nervous before a show. But it's like you care and you want to do a good job and that's okay. Yeah. You're allowed to do that.
And your audience will thank you for it.
Yes.
Now, there's a line in Alchemist, I am leather bound, which I love because it suggests to me that you're claiming space, because it's this, leather bound denotes timelessness, it denotes a classic volume. So I'm wondering at which point in the writing of that song that just came to you and you were like, that's it.
The writing of Alchemist really was one of those experiences where I was like, this is happening. This isn't me doing, this is just a happening thing. And I was just like, because it feels very literal and kind of, it's a bit of a cheekier take on my perspective. So yeah, I can't even really pinpoint where some of the lines, I mean, I have altars all over my house. My house is kind of an altar. So I set up different parts with little, trinkets and things like that. So when it's like, I am leather bound, I'm Vixenfield, I sit at the altar, rat with a golden tooth. It felt so literal in who I am, because I do feel like a bit of a rat with a golden tooth, a bit of a hillbilly. So, that, it just really encapsulated where I was at that very moment, in my house with all these altars and, that aspect of leather bound. I feel it's funny, different people have different perspectives on that one.
All right.
My producer, the first thing he said is, I'm thinking of a whip, like a whip cracking. I'm like,
okay. You'll
actually hear, if you really listen, there's a whip cracking in that song, right when it says I am leather bound, it goes so fun fact.
No, I just thought of a book. Again, maybe it's just because of me. But I also think alchemy, the word alchemy denotes magic and faith in the unknown, and you reference magic in the song Good Enough and children thinking there's still magic out here. So just as there's spirituality and creative flow in your life, I wonder what role there is for magic in your life.
I've had I've always been really obsessed with anything that was supernatural. I've always, as a kid, I had a lot of experiences where weird things would happen and I couldn't really understand them. Like when my grandpa passed, a lot of different things happened. Like I was only little and wasn't in school yet or anything, but I wrote his name like perfectly.
Right.
And my mum kept the piece of paper because I couldn't write yet, and just different things like that. So I've always had an interest in anything to do with mediumship and supernatural. And I think as an adult, that really expanded into spirituality and how that kind of can affect your life. And then I was always obsessed with Charmed and all of those kinds of things. So magic for me has been a part of my life. Even when I was a kid, my parents would always go out of their way to make me think that magic was real. My dad is a very imaginative person, so he would always do things to keep me thinking that anything's possible.
Right.
So I think I've always just had that. So when I reference in Good Enough, the childlike approach to magic and fairy tales, somewhere along the line we forget that it really does exist, because when we're kids, we just believe it. Somewhere we get cut off from being able to, we have to rationalize things. We have to make things make sense to fit certain scenarios, and that's not real. And I think that can be a detriment, even if perhaps sometimes it is our imagination. Does it matter?
Well, no, and the reason why I don't think it matters is because whether your experience with the supernatural is real or your imagination, it broadens your understanding of how not just Earth, the world, but the universe works. And where this feeds into creativity is, I think, you then believe you can pluck ideas from all sorts of places. So there's not just this linear understanding of how creativity works, and I have to get my ideas by spending hours hewing them out of wood or whatever it is. It's actually I can reach through to this dimension and pluck something from there.
Yeah. And I think people knowing that that's available to them is magic.
Yeah.
That's magic in of itself. And I think creativity is magic. I think as an artist, you're bringing something into form, which it's magic.
Yeah. Now I'm leading us towards Aces and Eights and towards the end of the album, and partly what I love about this track, every time I hear it, no matter how many times I've heard the album, I always sort of sit up a little straighter because it occurs almost in an unexpected place. It's a really up-tempo track. It's the sort of track that could have been an opener or the second track. But then when you listen to the span of the album, it's become clear because Aces and Eights is about gambling, essentially, as in gambling with the future, gambling the odds of your life. You've been showing us your deck of cards the whole way through. You're basically stacking them up in the songs that come before, and then you're saying, and I'm prepared to lay all this down. I'm wondering if that's how the structure of the album came to you, either like you thought it through or it just instinctually presented itself to you that way.
As far as structure, I kind of think of this as a storybook where I'm kind of dipping in and out of past and present tense. And then the next song is like the acceptance of that. So each song, I wanted to start the album with All We Are because I wanted to set the tone. And then from there, it's kind of like you're dipping in and out of what it is over the last 10 years of my life, what I've been doing to, I guess, alchemize these experiences into something that I can understand, sit with and accept. So that's kind of taking you on the journey. By the time we get to Aces and Eights, we're starting to move forward.
Right.
So for me, I'm like, okay, well, I've come to this perspective where I've accepted myself in my greater story, accepting the things that I didn't enjoy as being lessons and moving forward from them, letting them exist as they are and understanding the greater purpose for feeling and experiencing those things. Then we get to Aces and Eights and we can kind of, there's like that, I feel like it kind of opens up the next chapter. And when we're gambling, when we're looking at that, metaphor of putting it all on the line and moving forward, I think sometimes people feel that way with their pain. They hold on to it because they don't really know what other feelings that they should be feeling. So we're kind of like attaching ourselves to pain because it's familiar. Sometimes that feels scary to let go of. And it's so you can get stuck there. And a lot of people do. So for me, being able to let go of all these feelings, even past identities and everything that kind of came with the creation of this record, it felt like a bit of a gamble. To cross over.
Well, and the lines are there. We can feel you on the prefaces. I don't want to leave here. I don't want to say goodbye. But the truth is, I'm scared as hell for my next life. And that is you standing on the precipice in the second last song of the album. I think essentially saying to us, this was the life that I've had leading up to this, and now I'm about to gamble it all. But then the last track is happy. So.
Yes, and it's that acceptance, that full acceptance, and people have kind of taken it as a sad song, and it's not. I don't think of it as a sad song. It's, especially towards the end, it comes back around to, I know what happiness can feel like, look like, and I'm going to choose to experience that over, staying in that suffering mindset.
Yes, the suffering mindset. In a conversation with a book writer, I referred to self-doubt as a warm bath, because I think that sometimes it's too nice to get out of, because it's very familiar for a lot of people who are engaged in creative work, and the momentum of change and the momentum that is in Aces and Eights, actually, that we can hear and really feel in the album, can feel like too much.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. I'm going to use that.
Go right.
But it does.
Yeah.
You know, it can feel so familiar. And there's a lot of science now coming out about the familiar feelings and energetically shifting them. Have you heard much of Joe Dispenza's work?
Yes, I know about Joe Dispenza,
yeah. So he talks a lot about the familiar past and being in that and living and experiencing that, setting yourself up to experience that in the future. There's a lot to it, and there's so much science now that shows that that is in fact what we're doing. If we're attaching ourselves to a familiar past, we're going to expect that to happen in our future. And I've seen that happen so many times through my own life. So I have evidence there that tells me that if I can shift energetically, shift my mindset, well, of course, like, it comes back to that magical, childlike view of the world. Oh, I can experience something new and different, and I can actually find something joyful to experience.
But the agitation of change is more work and does require constant commitment, because I think it is that, you know, we're defaulting towards seeing something and experiencing something we already know. And to an extent, it's a bit like it's easier to stay fit than to get fit. So I think it's easier to be on the path of the agitation of change, for lack of a better term, once you're actually there, than to get there. But it still does require the dedication that's required for staying fit, which is you've got to get up every day, you've got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, get on with it. But I'm wondering now for you, given that the last track is happy, and there's a line in it saying the dream isn't what you thought it would be, and the dream was to be happy, but I would think for you there are always new dreams, that's part of that agitation of change.
Yes, and I think that there should always be a growth, and if you're not growing, you're essentially dying. So if you're not expanding yourself, dreaming bigger, wanting and wanting for yourself, then you're only going to regress. So I think that's a healthy way, and people are very afraid of change, and I'm very familiar with that feeling of not wanting things to change and wanting to stay. Oh, that's too hard to comprehend. I just want to stay comfortable. If we're not evolving, we are dying. So as human beings, we're made to do that. And it's interesting as well, I have evolved myself over my career. People even find it difficult when other people change. Oh, that's not familiar for me. That doesn't feel good. Oh, I know them like this. I don't think I want to accept them as the evolved version of themselves. I remember even when I was starting to get healthy, friends that I was surrounding myself with, not liking that, because it wasn't what, I used to drink and party, and it wasn't in line with who they thought I was. So it was like, whoa, what is she doing? She's not doing what we want to do, so this is uncomfortable for me. And then they project that onto you. So people do really feel uncomfortable in change. Taking that step forward, though, it's just like that lead by example. And hey, actually, you can come with me. You can come with me too and experience a different way of living. And that's okay. Yeah, what was the question again?
No, that's like it's a conversation more than a question.
Where am I going with this?
It's about new dreams, and I think that's
it.
I think that's it. It's just for you now. I see this album as a document of a period of time, but then it's also created the momentum of change for new creativity, new songs. No doubt, you're already working on things
for sure. And I think this record has expanded my version of what creativity can look like. There are so many creative projects that I want to do that historically I thought, oh, I can't do that. But it has allowed me to go, well, actually, you've taken the step now to do the exact creative thing that you wanted to do. You can do that in whatever avenue you want to. So it has expanded my ability to see Tori Forsyth as a creative doing creative things rather than Tori Forsyth who sings country music.
Right. Well, I think that is a perfect note to end on. Tori Forsyth, who does many things, as well as singing wonderful country music.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you.